It's my honor to join Nobel Peace Prize laureates Ms. Nadia Murad and Dr. Denis Mukwege in launching the Global Fund for Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. In the almost 2 decades that I have spent working to combat all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls, the most consistent demand I have heard from survivors of sexual violence is for justice, reparations, and recognition of what they have gone through. They all affirm that reparations will help to restore their lives and enable them to spend their remaining years in dignity. In addition to monetary compensations, survivors also ask for rehabilitative measures ranging from education, medical care, and livelihood support. It is my firm conviction that reparations are the most survivor-centered justice remedy available and the most significant means of making a difference in the lives of victims. Yet, even though this is what survivors want most, unfortunately, it is what they receive least. The reparations deficit continues to be a critical gap in the overall response to conflict-related sexual violence. This is why the establishment of the Global Fund represents such an important milestone along the path of our collective advocacy and action on behalf of survivors all over the world. From the initial discussions on what this fund should be to the development of the pilot projects that will be launched in the DRC, Guinea, and Iraq, survivors have been at the center of the consultations and will continue to lead the way as this initiative advances. One of the many innovations of this fund is the partnership it will foster. The governing board will be composed of survivors, civil society representatives, and frontline service providers working alongside governments, donors, and the private sector. My office and the United Nations will continue to support the establishment and implementation of the Global Fund, playing a key advisory role at the strategic and technical level. My office will continue to advocate for the sustained political and financial backing that will be required to realize our collective aspirations for this fund. I'm delighted now to give the floor to Dr. Mukwege and Ms. Nadia Murad to express their vision for the Global Fund for Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. Thank you.
Thank you to Under-Secretary-General Patton. I would now like to say that this fund that is spearheaded by both Nobel laureates, Dr. Denis Mukwege and Nadia Murad, is intended to support responses to the plight of survivors, such as those who have testified today and many more who have not had the chance to be heard. I am now turning, and with great pleasure, to Nadia. 60 Minutes, our CBS program, spoke to Nadia 5 years ago and then 2 weeks ago. And with fierce invincibility is the way she was described. She has become an unbelievable advocate for both the Yazidi Iraqi population and for all survivors. So welcome, please come to the lectern, Nadia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would first like to thank Ms. Pramila Patton and all of the former special representatives of conflict-related sexual violence. The Office of the SRSJ has been a voice on behalf of survivors the past 10 years. Thank you all for your work. I am honored to be here today to stand alongside my friend Denis Mukwege. I am honored to have the opportunity to work with Dr. Mukwege to launch this fund. I know firsthand the important role reparations can play in helping survivors heal. I would like to take a moment to celebrate Denis Mukwege. He has worked tirelessly for many years to start such a fund, and I want to recognize his efforts and those of his team. Without their dedication and hard work, we would not be standing here. I am grateful not only to Dr. Mukwege and his team, but also to all of those who have fought so hard to reach this day. The SEMA Network, Nadia's initiative team, Miss Elizabeth, and all survivors who have advocated for reparations for many years. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in the lives of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. The launch of the Global Survivors Fund is truly a historic moment, and I am humbled to have played a role in reaching this day. The Global Survivors Fund will help transform the lives of thousands of survivors and their families. But what makes the fund truly unique is its commitment to being 100% survivor-centric. The importance of this cannot be overstated. Survivors must be an integral part of the process and play a meaningful role in all aspects of peace and reconciliation. I am a survivor. There are thousands of survivors, many of whom are activists, and we have seen this today, this morning. Our real-life experience entitles us to a seat at the table. We have meaningful insights about what needs to happen. Survivors are here and need to be part of the solution. Access to reparations for victims of conflict-related sexual violence has not been a high priority on the policy agenda at the international, national, and local levels of government. This must change. Reparations are a right, and pressure must be put on governments to take their responsibility to fulfill this right. Reparations are not only a right, but they serve to help survivors begin to heal. Reparations allow survivors to be seen, to be heard, and to be acknowledged. Without reparations, survivors cannot begin to pick up the broken pieces of their lives and rebuild it. Survivors deserve the right to define what that means to them individually and collectively. The Global Survivors Fund will not only make it possible for local communities to design local solutions, but it will also work with governments and civil society actors to provide survivors with the access to reparations. What resources are currently being allocated to survivors? I cannot help but think of the Yazidi community, approximately 350,000 stranded in IDP camps without access to basic necessities. The injustice of this is evident. Women and children who manage to escape ISIS do not have access to psychological support, healthcare, and a safe shelter. Their lives are shattered, and they receive no support to rebuild their lives. The Global Survivors Fund establishes a direct way to make reparations a reality and will change the lives of individuals, families, and communities around the world. Allow me to thank those who have already committed to supported the fund, namely France, the European Union, and Germany. Thank you for heeding our call to help. I stand with survivors from around the world to ask all member states to support the work of the Global Survivors Fund. We must recognize the moral imperative to act. Collaboration is essential. Complex social problems require the work of multiple stakeholders. Together, we can achieve so much. Alone, we can achieve nothing. Children deserve a future driven by collaboration. Children deserve that we work together and put humanity above politics. Let today be the beginning of something we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Indeed, Nadia, let today be the beginning. Thank you. I would like to turn to Dr. Denis Mukwege, but to say he is a Congolese gynecologist who founded and worked in and works in Panzi Hospital is not to say enough of all the work he has done specializing in the treatment of women who have been raped by armed rebels. Today's launch takes off and is spearheaded by the Mukwege Foundation and by Nadia's initiative, and it is just the beginning of a conflict-related sexual violence fund with the ongoing use of sexual violence as a tactic of war and terror, particularly in the DRC. I invite Dr. Mukwege to the lectern. Thank you so much.
Après avoir écouté
Having listened to the victims of sexual violence and the survivors, I think that we all realize how far, as a human community, we have the heavy responsibility to answer their calls. Women who weren't protected by the human community. And we should at least be able to provide responses to their appeals. The Special Representative of the Secretary-General of the United Nations, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to welcome the 10 years of existence of the Special Office for the Secretary-General of the United Nations for Sexual Violence in Conflict. The progress that we've made in such short term under the leadership of Mrs. Wallström Bangura and Bangila, I think, deserves all of our respect for what they've been able to achieve in so little time. It's very encouraging and impressive. I think we can all hope that in 10 years from now, the mandate will no longer be needed. What we want to do is to eradicate sexual violence in conflict once and for all. We've seen the victims of sexual violence from conflict many times, and we're now very happy to be able to stand before you today and launch this Global Survivors Fund. As doctors, we've seen things that surgeons should never have to see. This kind of violence should not exist. These funds shouldn't need to exist either. States should take their responsibility to protect their civilian populations, particularly women and children. They have to be able to provide proper care for victims of war, and they should be able to bring proper rulings against the perpetrators of these hateful crimes, and also ensure that victims of these crimes are reintegrated into society. Now, we all know all of this. You know all of this. And yet, until recently, the link between sexual violence and international peace and security wasn't properly established, and the cries of survivors weren't heard or listened to. Indifference and inaction prevailed for far too long. Ladies and gentlemen, today something that was once seen as an inevitable consequence of war is now seen as something that can be avoided. We hope that a red line will be drawn under sexual violence and rape as a tool of war and being used for humiliation and even for extermination. Together with my co-laureate, Nadia Murad, and I would like to thank her for her constant appeals. We have been able to put sexual violence on the agenda of the international community. Under the leadership of France, the G7 summit in Biarritz last August tackled the issue of sexual violence in a conflict. And Resolution 2467 put the agenda of on women, peace and security, and that was driven by Germany. We've also been able to recognize the status of children who've been subject to rape. We all heard the call from the lady from Mali. I think we all need to take more responsibility here. We need to, of course, ensure that we work with victims, but also strengthen the penalties that we impose. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been developing holistic centres within our healthcare systems, focusing on the needs of our patients. We now have a one-stop centre. This allows victims of sexual violence to be able to go to one place. They only have to tell their story once, and they won't be stigmatized. And in this single place, they can receive the psychological, socio-economic and medical help that they need. I remember a woman who came to see me in my office. She was able to develop her own shop through a microcredit system. She was able to build some land and build a house. And once she was living in her own house, she came to see me. This was a woman who had been rejected. She told me that her husband had thrown her out. And now she said, "Doctor, I have a home. My children are going to school. They can eat twice a day." And now today, I feel like a woman again. I feel like a human being again. And if one day a man decides that he wants to live with me, then he will come and live at my house. I won't go to his home. And if he decides he's had enough, then he won't tell me to leave. He will leave my house and go and look for somewhere else to live. That's dignity. That is what it means to have a choice about your life. We have to redouble our efforts in order to ensure that this type of care is seen as a human right, to ensure rehabilitation for all victims and survivors of sexual violence, in line with Resolution 2106 of the Security Council, and to ensure that these rights are recognized around the world. It's been 10 years now that we've been urging at national and international level for compensation for victims and survivors of sexual violence and rape, without achieving this. However, the Global Survivors Fund is a significant achievement. And we would like to express our sincere gratitude to everyone who has supported us in our path towards restoring dignity to victims of sexual violence. I would just like to refer to Madame Nadia Pillay, who for the first time put together a high-level panel in the Democratic Republic of Congo, comprising of Madame Kungwa, Madame Elizabeth Wren, Jessica Neweth, and Leila. This team started its work in very difficult conditions, but today, together with the work of the Special Representative of the Secretary-General of the United Nations on sexual violence, and also with the support of Esther Dingemans and Elizabeth and Nadia and Nadia's initiative, today we can celebrate the launch of the Global Fund. I would like to congratulate all of you on the efforts that you've made. Everywhere we go, meeting women, young girls, and men as well who have been victims of sexual violence, we find them speaking the same words, the same devastation. People say their lives have been devastated. It's as if of being killed. We've heard that this morning. Rape and torture are cruel and inhuman punishments. And of course, in the lives of victims, there's always a before and after. Their lives are destroyed. Their genitals have been destroyed, and they have been rejected by society, by the family, forced to leave school. They're traumatized, often for the remainder of their lives. Ladies and gentlemen, compensation symbolizes reparations for what they've lost. We are saying to these people, you're a person, you've been victim of an atrocity, but it's not your fault. We can hear your voice, and we will help you to resume your life. We also have to ensure that we overcome prejudice. There are many obstacles, and there are legal procedures. The admissibility of proof is sometimes so difficult that it actually works in the favor of the criminals and leads to further impunity. Once we provide justice for victims, I think we can see that we as a human international community have to act. In Resolution 2467 of the Security Council, it calls for public recognition for the atrocities that these people have been subject to, and it says they should be compensated and rehabilitated. And it's in this spirit that we have fought to create this global fund for survivors, so that it will show solidarity and responsibility. This initiative has been worked on. We've worked together with survivors, with the Office of the Special Representative for Sexual Violence in Conflict, in order to achieve our very ambitious goals and to allow victims of sexual violence linked to conflict to access justice. This fund will go hand in hand with the fight against impunity in sexual crimes. But it is not a substitute for justice for victims of sexual violence. Criminals have to pay for their acts. We're mobilizing financial resources to have programs that will allow reintegration for victims. But we also need technical assistance to bring together examples and to give examples of best practices. But we also need to ensure that decision makers take their responsibility. The fund will have a very broad view of reparations and other forms of indemnity, whether individual or collective, material or symbolic, and will focus on ensuring that the acts are not repeated. It brings together members of survivors associations, states, civil society, and private stakeholders through UN agencies who will have an advisory role. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our strongest hope that this initiative that's been supported by France, Germany, and the European Union, as well as other states now who've also expressed an interest in supporting the fund, we hope that this will encourage other states and non-state actors to increase the funding for the Survivors Fund. Thank you very much for helping those who need it most. By joining up with this fund, you will show that when the international community puts its mind to it, it can help to make the world a fairer one. Thank you.